Hello and welcome to a tutorial on how to wire LEDs and motors using a AAA battery pack. If you have this type of battery holder, this is the wrong video for you. This video is for people using a AAA battery pack. If you are using the motor holder, do not put the battery pack in yet. In fact, don't start assembling any electronics yet. Make sure you know how you are going to assemble the pieces of your toy before you begin wiring. For example, Owen has to put the lacrosse helmet over the motor holder before putting in the motor because the motor prevents the lacrosse helmet from going over. So you have to think about how everything is going to go together before you can start wiring, just in case you need to do some wiring in some tight places. Everybody using the AAA battery pack has at least one or two LEDs, so we'll start by wiring our LEDs. We need to have a pliers, the wires that are provided, and the LEDs. You also need the little black plastic tubes. We're going to use pink wires for positive wires and gray wires for negative. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm grabbing my longest pink wire here because that's the one I want first, and I'm twisting the ends of the wire together. Each LED has a long leg and a short leg. The long leg is the positive leg. The legs bend, but be gentle with them. So here I am, I'm twisting the wire of the pink around the end of this LED, the long leg of this LED. Then I'm going to take a little bit of the end of the leg of the LED and I'm going to bend it to create a little bit of a hook. I'm using my pliers to squish it down so that I have a nice connection between the wire of the LED and my wire. Twist those ends a little bit more securely. If you don't have a pliers, you can use a tweezers for this too. It's just a little bit harder because they're not as strong. Then I grab one of my heat shrink tubes and I twist the other end of the wire to make it easier to thread this shrink tube on. I'll make sure all the wires are really nice and secure as I slide the heat shrink over it. Now you may have to apply a little bit of force from the back end as you're trying to slide it on. It won't be very tight at first. We're going to heat it with our hair dryer to shrink it up. So I'm going to do the gray wire on the short leg of the LED next. I twist the ends of the wire. This time I'm going to put the heat shrink tube on first. Doesn't really matter that much. And then I'm going to twist it together with this short leg of the LED. I'm going to bend the end of the LED into a hook and squash it around the wire. Then I can slide the heat shrink up over the exposed wire, and I'm ready to shrink. All right, that's great. So now my positive and negative ends of my LEDs are connected to pink and gray wires, so I know which one's positive and which one's negative when I go to connect them to my battery. There's also no exposed wire, so I won't have a short later on. All right, grab your hairdryer. You'll want to use the highest heat setting. Grab your wires in your pliers or tweezers so that you're not putting your hand in front of the hot end of the hairdryer. Turn the hairdryer on and hold the wires with the heat shrink over it, turning them a little bit. It shouldn't take more than a few seconds. Repeat this process for your other LEDs. Remember, pink wire for the long leg, gray wire for the short leg. If you are using the motor holder, this may be the time to insert the battery pack. First, determine how the person is going to access the switch. Are they going to access it through the little hole at the top of the motor holder, or do you actually want the switch on the bottom so that people can access it more easily? It is very hard to get the battery pack out of the motor holder, so make sure you've made a clear decision about how you want to do this. If you need to, insert the batteries into the battery pack before putting it into the motor holder. Thread the wires through the hole on the side of the motor holder so that you can access them. Even if you're not using the motor holder, the rest of the tutorial applies to you. This is how you create a parallel circuit using multiple components. So I have the motor wire black and red on the left. I have the black and red wires from the battery pack, and then I have my gray and pink wires for my LEDs. Alright, so I realize this may be more awkward for you because you may be dealing with different components. I'm doing this from the simplest perspective. So I'm also going to thread my black and red wires from my motor through the little motor wire containment holder. That just helps them from getting flapping around. You may or may not need to do that. So to hook up the motor, all I would need to do is connect the red wire to the red wire on the battery pack and the black wire to the black wire on the battery pack. But I also need to include my LEDs. Again, this may be more complicated depending on how your toy fits together. Before I put the heat shrink on the wire for the battery pack, I'm going to open the end of it a little bit, make it a little wider, because I have to combine 3 wires into one. So if I don't have that little extra space, I'm never going to fit that on there. So I gather all of my pink and red wires for my motor and the LEDs, and I twist them together. Then I twist the red wire from the battery pack onto all 3 wires and push the heat shrink over them. Now that wasn't easy to do, so make sure that everything is correct before you start to do the heat shrink step. After you've done this, it's really hard to go back. Then shrink your heat shrink. On mine, you can see that there is a little bit of exposed wire. That could cause a problem later on, so I'm going to have to be aware of the fact that there's a little exposed wire there when I'm finished. So now it's time to do the negative wires. So I'm grabbing both of the gray wires and the black wire from the motor. I'm twisting them together. And I found it works best if you stagger them a little so that all of the plastic ends are not exactly in the same place. That does make it easier to get the heat shrink on later. I'm going to stretch the heat shrink tube that goes over the negative wires. I'm using my pliers and my tweezers. I actually found this worked best just to stretch the top a little bit. And then I put it back on the battery pack wire and attach the battery pack wire to all of the other negative wires in the circuit. It's not easy to get that on there, but it takes a little while, but you can get it on there as good as you can. And then you can test your circuit to make sure it's working by turning on your battery pack. And there's my motor spinning and my lights lighting up. I just need to shrink my gray and black wire shrink wrap. And then I just want to check to make sure everything's okay. So the switch turns it on, oh, I do have an issue here. Since I have some exposed wires, it is possible for them to short. So with the battery on, I can accidentally turn them off when those two things touch. So I'm going to take some packing tape. If you have electrical tape, that's better, but packing tape is an okay solution for this. And we're just adding another layer of insulation over that exposed wire. The heat shrink tubes, because they were a little too small to combine 3 wires into one, made it a little bit difficult and made it so that there was some exposed wire. So I'm just going to take a piece of that packing tape, a little tiny piece, and wrap it over the place that has the exposed wire. Then I can't have a short between the 2 pieces of exposed wire because there's plastic between them. If you ever feel any components getting hot, you have a short, turn off your battery pack and find where exposed wires are touching. So I turn my battery pack on and notice that even though I'm touching those two areas, it doesn't turn it off because of a short, because the exposed wire is no longer exposed. Finish assembling your toy and take some pictures. Share it with us on the discussion board. Thanks for watching.